Jim, Janet, and Tim are the great singers. Chris up there leading the whole thing. I always wanted to be a musician growing up. But unfortunately, I was just blessed with a great sense of humor and rugged good looks. So there's no chance of me ever getting up on that stage. We are continuing our It's a Wonderful Easter series. And today we're going to talk about Judas. But before I get into that, I'd just like to share with you my favorite part of It's a Wonderful Life. And by the time I started watching A Wonderful Life, it was already on that where you could see it 25 times a day, on any channel it would be on. Come to find out, that movie was a financial flop when it first came out, and it was panned by the critics as not being a very good movie. But I love the movie, and I just wanted to share with you my favorite part. It's at the very end when the Jimmy Stewart character comes back to his own reality, right? And he's rushing home to see his wife and his kids, but he goes through town. And he sees the Emporium. He's like, "Merry Christmas, Emporium." He sees the movie theater. "Merry Christmas, movie theater." And then he looks at the building and loan, right, which is the bane of his existence, right? That's been his prison his whole adult life. And he's like, "Merry Christmas, old building alone." And I was thinking about that. It's those things that make us comfortable, right? Those things that we're used to. I had told you about our trip in January when we were coming back from Florida, and we got stuck in the snow, and I drove 700 miles with my firm grip on the steering wheel. And when we got to, we turned off on 32, and we started coming up the hill into Batavia, right? That's when I knew I was home. Because when you see the motel, right, and you're like, "Merry Christmas, Burger King." Then you see the UDF, you're like, "Merry Christmas, UDF." And then I even said, "Merry Christmas, roundabout." That roundabout has been the bane of my existence since it was put up. But I was so glad to be home. I was so glad to even see the roundabout. It's because it was comfortable to me. But whenever I think of It's a Wonderful Life, I think of that last few minutes of that movie. So now let's go on to Judas. Is there any other name that is more hated in the world than Judas? Judas is synonymous with betrayal and greed. But I think there's more to the story. Judas was one of the 12, a first-hand witness to the ministry of Jesus. Jesus is first mentioned in the book of Mark. So we're going to go look at Mark chapter 3, verse 13 through 19. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed the 12, and that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave them the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder; Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now, if you were to pick up the Bible and had never heard Scripture before and started here, this would require a major spoiler alert, right? Because right out of the gate, you are told that Judas is the one who's going to betray Jesus. With any other information given at this point, we know that Judas is going to commit this horrible sin. So why does Jesus select Judas? Let's look back at verse 13. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to them those he wanted, and they came to him. Called to him those he wanted. He did not pick 12 random men. Jesus even goes further in answering these questions on a more broader scale in the book of John. Just to set it up, Jesus had healed the invalid at the pool, and this upset the Jewish leaders because it had occurred on the Sabbath, and they wanted to persecute him. So Jesus answers them in this way. So John chapter 5, verse 17 and 18. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, they tried the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Jesus continues in verse 19. Jesus gave them this answer: "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does." Jesus is telling the Jewish leaders that all of his decisions are informed by God. Jesus needed these 12 men. They were all going to serve a purpose. If you think about it, all of the people that come in and out of our lives serve a purpose. Some for a long time, like a spouse. Some for a short time, like a year or two, maybe a coworker. Or sometimes only for a moment. They can be sinners or they can be saints. Jesus needs these men to fulfill his prophecy. He needed Peter's denial. He needed Thomas's doubt. He also needed Judas for his greed, for his betrayal, and for his sin. It's amazing to me how God moves people in and out of our lives. And I was reminded, about 25 years ago, I was a customer service rep for a financial services company. And I supported the sales staff. And at the time, and I don't know if you guys remember or not, but it's right when DirecTV first became really, really popular. But back then, remember, it was like $500 to buy the dish. And then on top of that, you had to pay for someone to install it. So the total cost would be, $700 or $800. And I wanted one so bad. But the only problem was I didn't have $700 or $800. And we were at a sales meeting, and our regional manager was in town. And he said, "We're going to have a contest next month. We're going to pair one service rep with one salesperson. And whoever has the most," we had just introduced a new product, and we were converting the old to the new. And the service person and the salesperson that had the most conversions could win, and we haven't determined a prize yet. And he said, "Any suggestions?" And I said, "Well, I'd love a satellite dish, a DirecTV satellite dish." And he goes, "Done, that's the prize." And what they were going to do is they were going to draw people at random. And I saw my salesperson sitting over there, the number one salesperson in Cincinnati. I was like, that's the guy I'm going to get on my team. That's the guy I'm going to get on my team. But what happens? Like Judas, sometimes we don't get to pick who's on our team, right? So they're drawing names. I get stuck with the brand newest salesperson who I think at that time had only had 3 sales. And I'm like, not getting my dish. We're going to lose. We're going to lose bad. But you know what happened? That new salesperson wanted the same satellite dish I did. He worked harder than I'd ever seen him work before. And we won that contest and we won that prize. And that changed me in a way because I had judged him wrongly, right? I didn't think he was going to be able to accomplish the goal. But he was. He wasn't who I would have picked. He was picked for me. Just like the other disciples were like, I don't know about this Judas guy, right? Because he was the only one. He wasn't Galilean. He was from Judah. And all of a sudden, he's been picked to be on their team. I'm sure they were all like, why is he here? But, as it turns out, we needed him. Correct? Now, we know Judas will betray Jesus and that ultimately this will lead to his crucifixion. But between here and there, we don't really hear anything more about Judas. We don't hear him again until we get to a week before Passover, a week before his betrayal. John chapter 12, verse 1 through 3. "6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took out about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume." The next set of verses gives us some insight into the character of Judas. John chapter 12, verse 4 through 6. "But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who would later betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. He shows us here his true colors. He didn't care about the poor, right? He was the keeper of the money bag. He wanted to help himself to it. It was a year's worth of wages. Judas believed it to be a waste. But that was Mary's worship. No worship is a waste. This is the problem with Judas. He has not changed. He is the same after 3 years as he was at the beginning. He had been witness to Jesus day in and day out for 3 years. He had seen Jesus heal the sick, make the blind see, the lame walk. He had even raised Lazarus from the dead. And still, he did not believe. He was with Jesus, but he was not really with Jesus. Today, as people of faith, we have to be all in. We can't just be halfway. We have to be fully dedicated. Does that mean we won't stumble? Does that mean we won't fall? By all means, no. I told you last year, around this time, about an experience I had at the Disney on Ice show downtown. We had parked 75 miles away, walked all the way up to the Heritage Bank Center. We get all the way up there, and a security guard tells my wife, Sean, that she cannot take her overnight bag / purse into the Coliseum because it's too big. And I was like, well, how are we supposed to know that? And the guy tells me, there's signs all along the way. You remember this story? There's signs all along the way. I don't remember ever seeing a sign. So I kind of get into a little bit of an argument with him. But I had no choice. So I take my wife's overnight bag / purse, walk 75 miles back to the car, then walk 75 miles back to the Coliseum. And I did not see one sign saying that you can't have oversized bags. So I say something to the guy. And that's when Sean gives me the look. You know that anybody who's been married more than 15 minutes knows the look, right? So I was like, stop, you're going to kick, who gets kicked out of Disney on Ice? Stop. So afterwards, I realized how wrong I was, right? The poor man was just doing his job. And me, as a person of faith, should have handled that situation a little bit better. So I've prayed upon that, and I remember that, and I always bring that up in my own mind whenever I'm feeling like a little rise of anger or, an issue with my patience, which I've always had a problem with. And I've always tried to use that moment to learn from it. Fast forward to last Sunday. We go down there again to see Disney on Ice, and with Sean's overnight bag / purse locked safely in the car, we walk up to a different entrance of the Coliseum. Who do I see? The same exact guard. I look at Sean. Sean looks at me. We don't even say anything. I'm like, I'm going to tell him that your purse is in the car and we didn't even try to bring it up. And Sean looks at me and goes, no, you're not. But I had changed, right? I had changed. I knew that we weren't going to be allowed to do that, and we were going to leave it in the car this time, and we weren't going to have any confrontation, and we were going to go to Disney on Ice, and we were going to spend $1,000 on popcorn and Disney wands and drinks and pictures. But Judas never truly changes, right? He never truly changes. Let's look at Luke chapter 22, verse 1 through 6. Now the festival of unleavened bread, called the Passover, was approaching, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some way to get rid of Jesus, for they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12, and Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. They were delighted and agreed to give him money. He consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when no crowd was present. 2 points I want to make here. First, the difference between Peter's denial and Judas's betrayal. Satan entered Judas He was being used as a vessel, just as the Lord had hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Peter's denial was different. Satan was testing him. Second point, opportunity. And our word of the year is kairos. And you can see it up here on the screen. When we talk about opportunity, what pops into your head? It's always a positive thought, right? It's never negative. When I say to you, I have a great opportunity for you, positive. An opportunity like this comes only once in a while. Positive. No one ever says, right? No one ever says, this opportunity will cost you your retirement savings. This opportunity will destroy your career. This opportunity will land you in jail. Nobody ever presents an opportunity in a negative light, but that doesn't mean these opportunities aren't negative, correct? Judas is waiting for his chance to hand over Jesus. That chance comes pretty quickly, but first, Jesus wants Judas to realize he's being betrayed and that Judas is the betrayer. In the upper room, after washing the disciples' feet, he says this in John chapter 13, verses 10 and 11. Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. He is making a reference to Judas. He is unclean because of his sin, and this is very, very important. On Wednesday night, in our Bible study, we have been going through the Old Testament very slowly. We started, I think, 2 years ago we started. And we've made a little bit of progress, but at our current rate, we'll make it to the New Testament sometime in early 2028. We spent roughly, I think, 6 or 7 weeks in the book of Leviticus. And if you've ever read Leviticus, it goes through all the instructions for how to present your offerings, how to prepare food, how to live your life. And wave offerings. Oh, thanks, Ken. Now I'm completely thrown off. I can't believe he just did that. But one of the big things in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Leviticus, is clean and unclean. And if you were considered unclean, this was a very, very big issue. It would require you to separate yourself from the community. You could only be considered clean after a certain amount of time, typically 7 days. And even then, you had to present yourself to the priest, and they would make sure that you were considered clean. This is a very serious charge among the Jewish people. Jesus continues in verse 18. "I am not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen." Remember back to what we had said before. "But this is to fulfill this passage of Scripture. He who shared my bread has turned against me." Remember, he did choose those men. This is also a serious allegation. He who also shared my bread has turned against me. Being betrayed, being wronged by others, always hurts. It hurts even more when it's someone you're close to. When he says that it's someone who shared his bread, the disciples begin to stare at each other and wondering who it is. Now, I just want to pause here for a second. The way I read things, when I read something, sometimes something will catch my eye and it'll spark a memory of a movie quote. And we always, on Wednesday night, we talk about movies all the time. And we've been talking about Tom Hanks lately. But I just want to pause here, and I realize this is a serious subject. But I read that verse like 50 times over the last 10 days. And every time I read it, this one particular movie quote kept popping into my mind. Anybody seen the movie Analyze This with Robert De Niro and Billy Crystal? Robert De Niro, he plays a mob boss, right? And he's starting to have problems with like anxiety and panic attacks for what he's doing. But he's a mob boss, right? He can't just go to a therapist or a psychiatrist. But he winds up finding Billy Crystal, who is a psychologist, and he goes to him. But he doesn't want to admit he's the one with the problem, right? So he does the whole, I have this friend. And he does all the, gives him all the symptoms and, without saying it was him. And he's got this big, huge mob bodyguard with him. And he's staying with him in the room. Billy Crystal excuses himself. And the whole thing is that the bodyguard's not the smartest in the world. He looks at Robert De Niro and goes, hey, boss, this guy with the problem, is it me? That's what I'm thinking here, right? So shouldn't they have known, right? Shouldn't Peter have known that he wasn't the one, right? Thomas should have known he wasn't the one, right? They're all like, who is it? Who is it? Who is it? So let's go back up to the upper room, 26 through 30 in John 13. Jesus answered, it is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So Jesus told him, what you are about to do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what he needed for the festival or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. Judas all along thought this was all going to be secret. He didn't think anyone was going to know. He didn't want to know. He didn't think anybody was going to find out. But what he did not count on was the fact that Jesus knew from the beginning. The whole plan, like Sean had shared last week, was to turn over Jesus in secret because they feared there would be a riot. Judas showed up and indicated he would point Jesus out by giving him a kiss so the guards could take him into custody. So after all that happens, and before Jesus is put on trial, let's look at Matthew chapter 27, 3 through 5. When Judas had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. What is that to us? They replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. Now, what I find interesting is Judas has remorse and he tries to give the money back. The priest who seized on the opportunity to get Jesus are not going to budge. They basically told Judas he was on his own. The sermon series we are in is Easter Without. So in this case, it's without Judas. The Easter story could be told without Judas. Like I said earlier, he is mentioned, and when he is chosen at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, but he is not mentioned again until the end. But we need his conviction. We need his betrayal. There were so many other people who could have pointed Jesus out for less money or no money at all. The woman cured for the bleeding issue. She knew Jesus on sight. The paraplegic whose 4 friends carried him to be healed. He could point Jesus out by sight. Even the Jewish leaders had previously questioned Jesus in person. So why Judas? This sin and this betrayal had to have a name attached to it. More importantly, Judas was one of the 12, the inner circle. Like I said earlier, he had been there from the beginning and seen and heard it all. This message to all of us, even the closest to God, can stumble and fall. It's interesting because if you look within the New Testament, there are a number of places where people have sinned, and Jesus relieves them of that sin, right? The adulterous woman, what does he say to her? Go and sin no more. What does he say to the prostitute who washes his feet and dries them with her hair? Your faith has saved you. Thank you. We all fall. We all stumble. We all sin. And it's our relationship with Jesus that we rely on to get us through those things. My wife Sean, manages a team of employees. And every week she has what's called a touch base call, where she'll speak to them just to see what they're working on, how they're doing. And I was thinking about that. What would my touch base call be with Jesus? Because I know what I've done. And I'd be like, well, I did this, I did that. I got angry at the security guard. I was stuck in traffic. I yelled at the guy on the phone. And then Jesus would go, oh, yeah, but you also did this. And you also did that. And we're still working on this. We can get through these hard times with our faith. And Jesus is there to lift us up and support us. So, I love this series. I think next week is crowds. I can't wait to see what happens next week. I want to tune in. I want to see what's going on. But overall, Judas needed to be part of this story. But in a sense, we all needed Judas too. Because with Judas's betrayal, it led to the crucifixion, which leads to the resurrection. And Jesus took that sin for all of us. Amen?